The winter in Chicago had a way of settling into bones, not just skin. The wind moved through the streets like it carried memories with it, cold, unkind, and impossible to ignore. I remember standing outside that small apartment on the south side, holding my son closer than I held my own breath. He was only 6 then, too young to understand why our lives had suddenly become a long silence broken only by my tears at night. His father had died in a factory accident 3 months earlier. One moment he was coming home with grease on his hands and a tired smile. The next moment there was a knock on the door that changed everything. After that knock, I stopped sleeping properly. I would sit by the window long after my son fell asleep, watching the streetlights flicker like they were unsure whether to stay on or give up completely. That was when I learned what widowhood really meant in America. Not just loneliness, but invisibility. We had no savings worth speaking of. The medical bills came first, then the rent notices, then the phone calls I stopped answering because I had no words left to explain what poverty sounds like. I took whatever work I could find. Cleaning houses in wealthy suburbs where the floors sparkled more than my future. Washing dishes in restaurants where I was never allowed to sit long enough to feel human. I learned to measure my worth in hours and exhaustion. My son, Daniel, would sit in the corner of those small apartments while I worked late into the night, doing homework under dim light. He never complained. Even when his shoes had holes, even when other children at school wore jackets that cost more than our monthly rent, he would just smile and say, "It's okay, Mom. One day I'll buy you everything you need." Those words became my fuel. I stopped eating properly so he could eat a little better. I stopped buying myself anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I told myself hunger was temporary, but his future was. Years passed like that, slow, heavy, repetitive. I watched him grow taller, then stronger, then quieter in ways that worried me. He became focused on success in a way that didn't feel like childhood anymore. He read business books instead of comic books. He asked questions about money that no child should have to understand. I knew I was raising him in survival mode, but I didn't know how to stop. When Daniel got into college on scholarship, I cried for 3 days. Not because I was sad, but because I finally believed the world might let him escape what I couldn't. He studied business administration. He worked part-time jobs I never knew about until much later. He started talking about startups, investors, success stories in Silicon Valley. Every time he came home, he looked a little further away from me, like ambition was building a wall I couldn't climb. Still, I was proud. Even when I didn't understand everything he said, I believed in him completely. I told everyone I met, "My son will change our life." And he did. By the time he was 28, he had built a company from nothing. I didn't even fully understand what the company did at first, something with logistics, technology, systems that made businesses run smoother. All I knew was that people started saying his name with respect, then admiration, then envy. We moved out of the small apartment. He bought a house in a quieter, richer part of the city. I remember walking through the rooms, afraid to touch anything, afraid my presence would stain success. But Daniel hugged me and said, "This is all because of you." For a moment, I believed that the pain had finally made sense. The invitation to his office launch came like a dream I was too scared to wake up from. He had built a large space downtown, glass walls, polished floors, modern design that looked like it belonged in magazines. He told me I had to be there. "Front row," he said. "Everyone needs to see you." I didn't own anything suitable for such an event. I had one simple dress I wore to church and special occasions. I cleaned it carefully, ironed it twice, and told myself it was enough. Because love, I believed, does not require luxury. The day of the launch, I took the bus into the city. I remember sitting by the window, watching buildings grow taller as I got closer to his world. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from pride I didn't know how to carry. When I arrived, everything was bright. Cameras flashed. People in expensive suits moved like they owned the air itself. I stood at the entrance for a moment, unsure where to go. I could feel eyes on me almost immediately. Whispers began quietly, like insects you can't quite see but feel crawling under your skin. "That must be the cleaner." She doesn't look like she belongs here. Maybe she got lost. I lowered my eyes. I told myself it didn't matter. I was here for Daniel, not them. When he finally saw me, I expected him to smile, to wave, to guide me inside. Instead, his expression changed in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't confusion. It was something sharper, something like embarrassment. He walked toward me quickly. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "what are you wearing?" I smiled nervously. "Your best day deserves my best dress." He looked around. People were watching. I could feel their attention tightening like a noose. "This isn't the place for this," he said. I didn't understand at first. I just wanted to see your success. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I saw something inside him struggling. Then it hardened. "Go home," he said. The words didn't immediately reach me. "What?" "Just go home, Mom. I'll talk to you later." I stood there, confused, my heart trying to catch up with what my ears were hearing. "I came for you," I said softly. He lowered his voice further. "You're embarrassing me right now." That sentence broke something inside me I didn't know could break again. Before I could respond, before I could even understand how to breathe properly, he turned away. And in front of all those people, I was no longer a mother. I was a mistake he wanted removed from the room. Someone guided me out. I don't remember who. I only remember the glass doors closing behind me and the sound of applause beginning inside, celebrating a success I was no longer part of. Outside, the city felt colder than I remembered. I sat on a bench across the street for a long time. I told myself he didn't mean it. I told myself pressure makes people say things they don't understand. I told myself many lies because truth was too heavy to hold. When night came, I started walking. I didn't know where, I just walked. Days passed like that. I don't know exactly how many. Hunger became normal. Sleep became rare. I ended up near areas where people didn't ask questions, where survival was shared silently between strangers. And then, one evening, I saw him. Or I thought I saw him. A man was standing near a traffic light, talking on the phone, laughing softly. He looked like Daniel. Same posture, same confidence, same world that no longer included me. I stepped forward slowly. My body felt weak, but something inside me pushed me forward anyway. The light turned green. People moved around him. He ended the call and turned slightly. That was when he saw me. Or I saw him see me. The smile on his face disappeared instantly. For a moment, neither of us moved. And then I realized something even before he spoke. He didn't recognize me. Not at first. I had become something else entirely. A beggar in torn clothes, hair unkempt, face shaped by days I couldn't count. But when I lifted my eyes fully, when he finally looked deeper than the surface, something inside him collapsed. "Mom," he whispered. And the world stopped. His phone fell from his hand. His breath broke in half. And I watched my son, my successful businessman, my pride, my future, fall to his knees in the middle of a busy street in Chicago, begging for forgiveness from the woman he had thrown away. But by then, I was already too far gone to answer immediately. I remember his voice before I remember anything else. "Mom." That single word didn't sound like it belonged on that street. It didn't belong between moving cars, flashing traffic lights, and strangers who had no idea they were walking past a breaking life. It sounded like something from another world, one where I still had a home, a kitchen light, and a son who looked at me without shame. But I didn't answer him right away. Because I didn't know if I was still his mother in the way he meant it. He stepped closer, and I saw it then, the panic building in his eyes. The way his confidence, the same confidence that once filled conference rooms and business stages, was collapsing like paper in rain. "Mom, what happened to you?" His voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because I had been asking myself that same question for so long I had stopped expecting an answer. What happened to me? Life happened to me. Grief happened to me. Poverty happened to me. And love that I thought I had given correctly, had happened to me in the most painful way of all. People walked past us. Some slowed down, some stared, most kept going. That is how cities work here. Suffering is only important if it interrupts your direction. He reached out like he wanted to touch my shoulder, then stopped halfway. Like he was afraid I might disappear if he confirmed I was real. "I was looking for you," he said. Those words hit me harder than anything else. Looking for me. After he had told me to go home. After he had called me embarrassing. After he had closed a glass door between us and chosen applause over my presence. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. Not from cold anymore, but from something deeper. Something that had been holding on too tightly for too long and finally started letting go. "You didn't look for me that day," I said quietly. He froze. I could see him trying to find words. Businessmen are taught to speak in meetings, in negotiations, in rooms where silence costs money. But none of those lessons help when the person in front of you is the one who used to wash your fevered forehead at night. "I didn't mean," he started. But I stopped him with a small movement of my hand. Not anger, not accusation. Just tiredness. Because I had learned something in those days on the streets of Chicago. Apologies mean nothing if they arrive after the damage has already learned to live inside you. I stepped back slightly. The movement made him panic. "Mom, please don't go," he said quickly. I didn't know things were this bad." That sentence almost made me smile again. He didn't know. Of course he didn't know. Because when I was surviving, I was also disappearing. Slowly, quietly, the kind of disappearance that doesn't make noise loud enough for success stories to hear. "I didn't want you to know," I said. His brows pulled together. "Why would you hide this from me?" That question. That innocent, painful question. It reminded me of all the nights I chose not to eat so he could have a warm meal. All the mornings I walked to work in freezing weather because bus fare meant his school supplies. All the times I smiled so he wouldn't learn what fear looks like in a mother's face. "I hid it," I said slowly, "because I wanted you to grow without looking back at me." He shook his head like he couldn't accept it. "That's not how it should have been." I finally looked at him directly then. And I saw what success had done to him. Not just wealth, not just confidence, but distance. A carefully built world where pain was something solved, not lived, where people were categorized, managed, filtered. "You think there is a should in survival?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. The light changed again. Cars moved. The city kept breathing like nothing important was happening. But something important was happening. A son was realizing the cost of his ambition. And a mother was realizing the cost of her sacrifice. "I saw you," I said after a moment. He frowned slightly. "When?" "At your office." His face tightened instantly. I continued anyway. "I heard them laughing," I said. "I heard what they said about me." He lowered his eyes. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered. That was the first honest thing he said. Not an excuse, not a defense, just confusion. I nodded slowly. "I know," I said. That surprised him. He looked up. "You know." I exhaled. Because I did know. Not because I understood his actions, but because I understood the world he was standing in. A world I had worked myself into the edges of through him, but never truly belonged to. "I know what it means to want to belong," I said, "even if it costs you something you love." His throat moved as he swallowed. For a moment, I thought he might cry again, but he didn't. Instead, he did something I wasn't ready for. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his car keys, then his wallet, like he was searching for solutions money could fix. "We can fix this," he said quickly. "You don't have to be like this. We'll get you a place, medical care, anything you need." I listened, and something inside me became very still. Because that was the difference between us now. He was trying to solve me, and I was trying to be heard. "I don't need fixing," I said quietly. He stopped. But you can't stay like this, he said. I stayed like this so you could not, I replied. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels full of everything people avoided saying for years. A taxi horn blared somewhere behind us. A man shouted. A siren passed in the distance. And then I saw something in his face I had not seen since he was a child. Fear. Not fear of loss. Fear of guilt finally becoming real. I didn't throw you away, he said suddenly, louder now, like volume could change reality. I looked at him carefully. No, I said, you just didn't stop it from happening. That sentence landed differently. He stepped back slightly like it physically pushed him. I could see his mind trying to rewrite the past, trying to adjust it into something easier to carry. But memory doesn't cooperate with comfort. I thought you left, he said suddenly. That made me pause. Left, I repeated. He nodded quickly, desperate now. After the launch, I thought you were angry. I thought you went back home and just cut me off. I closed my eyes briefly. So that was his version. Not abandonment, not cruelty, just misunderstanding wrapped in assumption. It almost made me sadder than anger would have. I didn't leave, I said. My voice was quieter now. I was taken out like I didn't belong inside your success. He flinched. Because that part, he could not rewrite. He remembered it now. I could see it in his face. The moment replaying behind his eyes, the moment he chose image over identity, audience over origin. I was under pressure, he said weakly. I know, I replied again. But this time, I added nothing after it. Because understanding something is not the same as excusing it. The wind picked up slightly. My thin shawl moved with it. I pulled it tighter around myself. He noticed. He took off his coat immediately and stepped forward. Please, he said, trying again, let me take you somewhere warm. This time, I didn't refuse immediately. I looked at him for a long time. Really looked. Not at the businessman. Not at the success story. But at the boy who used to fall asleep holding my hand when thunder scared him. The boy who used to ask me why the world was unfair. The boy who once believed I was the answer to everything. And I asked myself something I had not asked in years. When does a mother stop belonging to her child? The answer didn't come easily. Because love doesn't end cleanly. It doesn't have edges you can cut. It just changes shape until you are no longer sure what you are holding. I can't go back to that life, I said finally. He looked confused. What life? The one where I am introduced as your problem. His face fell. That's not what I meant. I know, I said. And this time, I almost smiled again. Because that was the tragedy of us. He never meant harm. But harm happened anyway. And I carried it longer. A silence stretched between us again, but this one felt different. Less like distance, more like something suspended. Finally, I said the words I didn't think I would ever say to him. I need time. He nodded quickly. Okay, we'll take time, we can fix. I raised my hand slightly again. No fixing, I said gently. Just time. To understand what remained between us when success, pride, and shame were removed. He stood there, holding his coat, not sure whether to move closer or step back. And I, for the first time in many years, did not feel like I was disappearing. I felt like I was being seen. Even if it hurt. Even if it was too late. Even if I did not yet know what forgiveness would look like. I turned slightly then, not walking away fully, just enough to breathe without his shadow on me. And behind me, I heard his voice again. Soft this time. Not as a businessman. Not as a son demanding answers. But as someone finally afraid of what he had become. Mom, I don't know how to live with this. And I closed my eyes. Because neither did I didn't turn back immediately when he said that. I don't know how to live with this. Because some sentences don't need answers right away. Some sentences just hang in the air until the people who spoke them realize they can't be taken back. The wind moved between us again, colder now. Or maybe I was just feeling it more clearly. Chicago never changes for anyone, but it always feels personal when your life is breaking. I finally spoke without facing him fully. You live with it by not running from it, I said. There was a pause behind me. I could hear him breathing, uneven, uncertain, the kind of breathing a person has when they realize money cannot undo what their heart just witnessed. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said again, quieter this time. I nodded slightly. I know. Those two words again, the same words I had repeated since the moment I saw him on that street. Because I did know. But knowing was not the same as being healed. I began to walk slowly. Not away from him. Just forward. Because standing still had started to feel like sinking. After a few steps, I heard him follow, not too close, but close enough that I knew he was still there. The city around us kept moving. Cars passed. People passed. Life did what it always does. It continued without permission. We reached a quieter street where the noise softened slightly. A small corner store stood open, its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. I stopped near it, not because I wanted anything, but because my legs were starting to remind me of everything I had ignored for too long. He stopped beside me. You should sit, he said. I almost smiled at that. So many years of me telling him the same thing when he was tired, when he was sick, when he pushed himself too far. Now the roles were reversed, but the concern sounded familiar. I've been sitting for too long in places that were not meant for resting, I said. He looked down. The silence between us grew softer here, less sharp than the street corner where truth had first hit him. Finally, he spoke again. Where did you go after I asked you to leave? That question carried something heavy inside it. Not just curiosity, but guilt trying to organize itself into understanding. I leaned slightly against the wall of the store, not fully sitting, just holding myself steady. I didn't go anywhere specific, I said. I just kept moving. He frowned. For how long? I didn't answer immediately. Because time in those days didn't feel like something I could measure properly. It was just hunger, cold, and footsteps. Long enough to stop counting, I finally said. His jaw tightened. I should have looked for you. The sentence came out like punishment he was placing on himself. I turned my head slightly toward him now. And if you had, I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Because he didn't know what he would have done differently. He only knew something was wrong now. I don't know, he admitted. Honesty again. It was becoming a pattern. I nodded slowly. That's why I don't blame you for not knowing then, I said. But I also don't erase what happened because you know now. He closed his eyes briefly. The weight of that truth settled over him. Not as anger. As reality. We stood there for a while without speaking. The store door opened and closed a few times. A bell rang. Someone inside laughed at something I couldn't hear. And I realized something strange. For the first time in days, I wasn't being ignored. I was being watched. Not like the office. Not like judgment. But like someone afraid to lose something they had just found. He spoke again softly. Mom, you're not like the stories I told myself. I looked at him. What stories? He swallowed. That you were safe, that you were okay, that if I succeeded, you would always be protected. I exhaled slowly. Those words felt like glass. Because they showed me something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see. He had built his success on a belief that I was somewhere stable, waiting. And I had built my survival on the belief that he didn't need to know the truth. Two illusions, built separately, collapsing together now. I wasn't protected, I said. He nodded immediately, almost too quickly. I see that. Another silence. Then he said something that changed the air between us again. "Come stay with me." I looked at him carefully. Not surprised. Not angry. Just careful. Because offers like that sound simple when spoken quickly, but they carry entire worlds inside them. "I have a house," he continued quickly. "Space, staff, doctors if you need them, you don't have to be out here." I studied his face. Not the businessman's urgency, but the son's panic. He wasn't offering comfort. He was trying to erase what he saw. "I don't need staff," I said gently. "I don't care what you need," he said suddenly, then immediately softened his voice. "I mean, I just can't leave you like this." That sentence, "I can't leave you like this," it should have sounded like love. But it also sounded like discomfort he couldn't tolerate anymore. I pushed myself slightly off the wall. "You already did leave me once," I said quietly. His face changed instantly. "That wasn't." I raised my hand slightly again. Not to silence him, just to slow him. "I'm not accusing you," I said. "I'm remembering." That word made him stop. Remembering. Because memory cannot be argued with. It only exists. He stepped back a little, like he needed space to think. "I don't know how to fix this," he said again, but softer now. Less desperate, more broken. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. "You don't fix it." He looked up. "You live with it," I repeated. A pause. "And you decide what kind of person you are after it." That seemed to land deeper than anything else. He looked away toward the street. Cars passed, headlights brushing over his face in fragments. "I don't want to be that person," he said. I nodded slowly. "Then don't be," I replied. Simple words. Hard truth. He turned back to me. "So what do I do?" For the first time, his voice didn't sound like a businessman asking for strategy. It sounded like a son asking for direction he should have learned years ago. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized something I had avoided accepting. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was also a man, standing at the edge of understanding consequences. And I was the only bridge left between who he was and who he could become after this. "You don't decide quickly," I said. "You don't clean this with money. You don't silence it with solutions." I paused. "You sit with it," I continued, "even when it hurts." His eyes lowered again. "And you listen," I added softly. "To what?" "To what you ignored when it was inconvenient." A long silence followed. The city kept moving, the wind kept passing, but between us something quieter began to form. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but awareness. Finally, he spoke again. "Will you let me see you again?" I considered that question carefully. Not emotionally. Practically. Because I wasn't sure what I was anymore. A mother, a burden, a memory, a consequence. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. He nodded. He didn't push. That surprised me. Instead, he just stood there, as if learning how to exist in uncertainty for the first time. I stepped slightly away from the wall. "I need to go now," I said. He immediately straightened. "Where will you go?" I looked down the street. "I don't know that either." That was the truth. And for the first time, I said it without fear. He hesitated, then slowly took a step back, giving me space. But before I moved, he spoke one last time. "Mom." I looked at him. His voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry for more than you know how to hear right now." I nodded once. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Just acknowledgement. And then I turned and walked forward again. Not away from him, but into whatever came after being found. The night in Chicago doesn't fall, it settles. By the time I had walked far enough for the city lights to blur together, my body felt like it no longer belonged to me. Every step was slower than the last, not because I was thinking, but because exhaustion had finally stopped asking permission. I didn't know where I was going. That truth had become normal. When you live without stability for long enough, direction stops meaning home and starts meaning survival. I passed closed shops, flickering signs, a few people huddled near subway entrances. Some looked at me, some didn't. I had learned by then that both are forms of recognition, just different kinds of distance. Eventually, I found myself near a public shelter. Not because I planned it. Because my feet remembered places my mind had stopped numbing. There was a line outside. Men, women, all carrying the same kind of quiet defeat. No one asked questions. No one offered stories. That is the strange piece of places like this. You are allowed to exist without explanation. I joined the line. And for the first time in many years, I did not say I was someone's mother, or someone's widow, or someone's responsibility. I was just another person waiting. Inside, the air was warmer. The smell of soup and disinfectant mixed in a way that felt strangely honest. I took a small bowl when it was handed to me and sat on a metal bench near the wall. My hands trembled slightly as I held it. Not from hunger alone. From everything that had happened before hunger became noticeable again. I ate slowly. Not because I wanted to savor it. Because my body had forgotten what regular eating felt like. As I sat there, I thought of Daniel again. Not the man on the street. Not the businessman. But the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap during long bus rides when we couldn't afford proper transport. The boy who used to ask me if sadness was something people grow out of. I wondered what he was doing now. Was he sitting in his office? Was he staring at the same glass walls that had once made him proud? Or was he somewhere alone, trying to fit guilt into a life that had never prepared space for it? I didn't know. And for the first time, I accepted that not knowing was no longer something I could fix. Hours passed. The shelter grew quieter. People found corners, blankets, small spaces of temporary safety. I stayed where I was, not sleeping yet, just letting my body understand stillness again. At some point, I heard a voice. "Ma'am." I looked up. A volunteer stood nearby, holding a thin blanket. "You can take this," she said softly. I nodded and accepted it. "Thank you," I replied. My voice sounded unfamiliar to me, like it had been stored away for too long. She hesitated before walking away. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders. It was thin, but it felt like something more than warmth. It felt like acknowledgement. That I was still here. Still visible in some way. I closed my eyes for a moment. And that was when the memories came back more clearly than before. Not the office. Not the street. But earlier years. When Daniel was small, and I used to work 2 jobs. When I would wake up before sunrise to clean houses in neighborhoods I could never afford to live in. I remembered one winter morning in particular. He had been sick. Feverish. We had no insurance that week because I had chosen rent over coverage. I had held him through the night, wiping his forehead with damp cloths, praying in silence I barely believed in anymore. At some point, he had looked at me with half-closed eyes and whispered, "Mom, don't leave me." And I had promised him, something I spent the next 20 years trying to keep. "I won't," I had said. I had kept that promise. In ways that cost me more than I understood at the time. A sound pulled me back. Footsteps. I opened my eyes. For a brief moment, my mind did something dangerous. It hoped. But it was Daniel. Just another person moving through the shelter. I lowered my gaze again. Hope is expensive when you don't have stability to support it. Morning came slowly. The shelter lights dimmed slightly as the outside world brightened. People began to move again, some leaving, some staying, some unsure. I stood up carefully, folding the blanket and placing it where I was told. Outside, the air was colder again. The city had reset itself overnight, as it always does. I started walking, not with direction, but with purpose I couldn't yet name. Hours later, my legs began to ache again. My body was reminding me of limits I had ignored too long. I stopped near a small park. Bare trees, empty benches, a few scattered leaves moving across the ground like they had nowhere urgent to be. I sat down, and that is when I saw him again. Not immediately. At first, I only noticed a familiar car passing slowly along the street. Then it circled back and stopped. My heart did something it hadn't done in years. It hesitated. The door opened. Daniel stepped out. He was not in the same state as before. No crowd, no office, no suit of performance. Just him. He looked like he hadn't slept. He walked toward me slowly, as if afraid I might disappear again if he moved too fast. I stayed seated. Not because I was weak, but because I didn't trust my body to react without breaking something inside me. He stopped a few feet away. "I looked for you all night," he said. I didn't respond immediately, because I didn't know what all night meant any more in his world. Was it effort? Was it guilt? Was it realization finally catching up? "I went back to the places I thought you might be," he continued. His voice was different now. Less controlled. Less certain. More human. I nodded slightly. "Did you find anything?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." Silence. Then he took a step closer. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. I looked at him. "That happens when truth doesn't leave you alone," I said. He flinched slightly at the words. But he didn't argue. Instead, he slowly sat down on the bench beside me. Not too close, but close enough that I could feel he was trying. We sat there for a while without speaking. A long while. Cars passed in the distance. Leaves moved. Time continued doing what it always does. Finally, he spoke. "I canceled the event schedule for today." I turned slightly toward him. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because I realized I don't know what I built if you're not part of it." That sentence landed heavily. Not dramatic. Not poetic. Just honest. I studied his face. He looked smaller somehow. Not in size, but in certainty. "What do you want from me now?" I asked quietly. He hesitated, then answered truthfully. "I don't know how to be your son again without undoing what I've become." I nodded slowly. That was the real question. Not forgiveness. Not reunion. But identity after consequence. "You don't undo it," I said. He looked at me. "You learn to carry it differently." A long silence followed. This time, he didn't rush to respond. He just listened. And for the first time since I had seen him on that street, I noticed something changing in him. Not fixing. Not solving. But listening without interrupting the pain. And that was the beginning of something neither of us had words for yet. He stayed seated beside me longer than I expected. Not speaking. Not trying to fill the silence with explanations or solutions. Just there. Chicago moved around us like it always does. Cars passing, distant horns, footsteps that never belonged to us. But in that small pocket of a park bench, time felt slower, like it was waiting to see what we would do next. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Not because I was calm, but because I didn't trust them not to shake again. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I found your old employer records," he said quietly. I turned my head slightly. That surprised me, because I didn't think there was anything left of my old life that he had not already unknowingly stepped over. "You looked?" I asked. He nodded. I needed to understand how long. He stopped. Like the number itself was too heavy to say out loud. "How long I wasn't there," he finished instead. I looked forward again. The trees in front of us were bare, no leaves left to hide behind. I worked where I could, I said simply. He exhaled slowly. I saw how many jobs you took at once, he said. Cleaning, restaurants, night shifts. He paused again. His voice lowered. You were doing all that, while I was in college thinking you were okay. I didn't respond immediately. Because okay is a word people use when they want distance from reality. I wanted you to think I was okay, I said finally. He turned slightly toward me. Why? I stared at the ground for a moment. Because answering that question required me to reopen years I had carefully folded shut. Because I didn't want you to stop dreaming, I said. He frowned. That doesn't make sense. I nodded. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It just had to make sense to me. Silence again. But this one was different. Less sharp. More fragile. Like we were both afraid of breaking what little understanding had started forming. A bird landed briefly on the ground nearby, pecked once, then flew away. I watched it leave. Daniel spoke again, softer now. I used to think success meant fixing everything that was broken. I turned slightly. And now, I asked. He looked at his hands. Now I think it just changes what you're allowed to ignore. That honesty surprised me more than anything else he had said so far. Because it showed awareness. Not guilt alone, but reflection. I nodded slowly. That's the first thing you've said today that sounds like learning, I said. He gave a faint, tired smile. It doesn't feel like learning, he admitted. It feels like collapsing. I looked at him then. Really looked. The sharp edges of confidence were still there, but softened. Like something inside him had been pressed too hard and finally cracked just enough for light to enter. That's what learning often feels like, I said. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. I keep replaying that day, he said. I stayed quiet. I keep thinking about the moment I asked you to leave, he continued, and I can't understand how I didn't see you properly. I inhaled slowly. There was too much noise. I said. What noise? He asked immediately. I turned my gaze forward again. The noise of people watching you, I said. The noise of expectations. The noise of wanting to look like you belong in a world you built yourself into. He closed his eyes briefly. That's not an excuse, he said. I nodded. I know. Another pause. Then I added something more. But it is the reason. He didn't argue. Because deep down, he already knew. We sat like that for a while longer. The morning light shifted slightly, warming the edge of the park. Not enough to feel comfortable. Just enough to remind us the day was continuing whether we were ready or not. Eventually, he spoke again. I want to make it right, he said. I let that sentence sit in the air for a moment. Because it carried weight that people often underestimate. Making things right. As if life were a document you could edit. I turned toward him slowly. You can't make it right, I said gently. His face tightened slightly. But I can try, he said quickly. I nodded. Yes. A pause. And trying is different from fixing. He listened carefully. So what does trying look like? He asked. That was the first practical question he had asked since this began that didn't come from panic. I considered it. Not emotionally. But honestly. You stop treating me like something you have to erase or repair, I said, and you start accepting what I am now. He frowned slightly. What you are now. I nodded. Yes. A quiet moment passed. I'm not the woman you introduced at your office, I said. He looked down. I know. I'm not the version of me you left behind when success started, I continued. He stayed silent. I am what remains after all of that. That sentence felt heavy even as I said it. Not bitter. Just true. Daniel exhaled slowly. I don't want you to be what remains, he said. I looked at him. That's not your choice anymore, I replied gently. He flinched slightly, but nodded. I understand. A breeze passed through the park again. This time, I didn't pull my shawl tighter immediately. Something about sitting here felt less like survival and more like being present. After a long pause, he spoke again. Where are you staying? I hesitated, then answered honestly. Shelter. His face tightened immediately. I can get you somewhere better. I shook my head slightly. That's not what I need right now. He looked confused. Then what do you need? I took a slow breath. I need not to be hidden again, I said. That made him stop. Completely. Because he understood what I meant. Not physically hidden. Emotionally removed from discomfort. He nodded slowly. I won't hide you, he said. I studied him. He meant it. But meaning something and being ready for it are not always the same thing. We sat there a little longer. Then he asked something quieter. Can I come see you tomorrow? I didn't answer immediately. Not because I wanted to reject him, but because I needed to understand what that would mean. Eventually, I said, yes. Relief crossed his face briefly. But I raised a hand slightly. But not as an obligation, I added. He nodded quickly. Not as an obligation, he repeated. A pause. As your son, he asked carefully. I looked at him. That question was more fragile than anything else he had said. Because it wasn't about success. It was about identity. I took a moment before answering. As someone learning how to be one, I said. That seemed to settle something in him. Not fully, but enough for now. He stood slowly. I'll come tomorrow, he said. I nodded. He hesitated, then added softly. I'm not going to let you disappear again. I looked up at him. And this time, I didn't respond with comfort or resistance. Just truth. Then don't disappear from this either, I said. He understood. He gave a small nod. And then he walked back toward his car. I watched him leave. Not as a success story. Not as a mistake. But as something unfinished. And for the first time since everything had broken, I realized something important. My story was no longer only about what I had lost. It was now also about what still remained unresolved between us. The next day did not arrive gently. It came with the same coldness, the same gray sky, the same indifferent city that never asked whether I was ready to continue living inside it. I woke up early inside the shelter. Not because I had rested well, but because my body had grown used to waking up before comfort could settle in too deeply. Around me, people were already moving, folding blankets, preparing to leave, stepping into another day that promised nothing new. I sat up slowly. My joints ached more than I wanted to admit. Age does not arrive all at once. It enters through small pains that pretend to be temporary until one day you realize they are staying permanently. I held the thin blanket around my shoulders for a moment longer before folding it carefully and returning it. The volunteer from yesterday was there again. She gave me a small, polite smile. I returned it lightly. Not because I felt cheerful, but because I had learned that kindness is sometimes the only currency available when everything else is gone. Outside, the air was sharper than yesterday. I started walking again, without direction. But this time, something was different. I wasn't only walking to survive. I was walking because I was waiting. And waiting, I realized, has its own weight. Daniel had said he would come. And part of me, quiet, careful, almost unwilling, was still expecting him. That expectation scared me more than the cold. Because hope, when it returns after betrayal, does not arrive clean. It arrives cautious, damaged, unsure whether it is allowed to exist again. I reached the same park bench later in the morning. The same one. As if the city had silently agreed that unfinished things return to unfinished places. I sat down and waited. Time moved differently now. Not slowly. Not quickly. Just uncertain. A man passed by pushing a stroller. A woman sat on a nearby bench, reading something on her phone. A dog barked at nothing in particular. Life continued rehearsing itself around me. Then I heard it. A car door. My body reacted before my mind did. I turned slightly. Daniel stood at a distance. This time, he was not rushing. Not uncertain like before. Just present. He was holding something in his hand. A small paper bag. He walked toward me carefully, like someone approaching a fragile surface. When he reached the bench, he didn't sit immediately. He looked at me first. Really looked. Not scanning. Not analyzing. Just seeing. I came early, he said softly. I nodded. I noticed, I replied. A faint, almost nervous smile passed over his face. I wasn't sure if I should bring anything, he said, lifting the bag slightly. I looked at it. You didn't have to bring anything, I said. I know, he replied. A pause. But I wanted to. He sat down slowly beside me. Not too close, but closer than yesterday. The space between us felt different today. Less like distance. More like uncertainty learning its shape. He placed the bag between us. I got you something to eat, he said. I looked at it but didn't open it immediately. Instead, I studied him. There was something different in his expression today. Less panic. More awareness. You didn't sleep much, I said. He looked slightly surprised. How can you tell? I gave a small shrug. A mother notices things before she understands them. That made him look down briefly. I kept thinking about everything, he admitted. Everything, I asked. He nodded. About you, about me, about what I built, about what I ignored. His voice was steady, but not strong. Steady like something holding itself together carefully. I nodded slowly. That sounds exhausting, I said. He gave a faint laugh. It is. A silence followed. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was observational. Like both of us were slowly learning how to exist in the same space again, without breaking it. Finally, I opened the bag. Inside was simple food. Warm. Carefully chosen. Not extravagant. Not performative. Just thoughtful. I took a small bite. It tasted like effort more than flavor. He watched me quietly. Not in a controlling way. In a learning way. After a moment, he spoke. I went back to the office yesterday after I left you. I paused slightly. Then continued eating. And, I asked. He exhaled. It felt different. I looked at him. How? He struggled for a moment to find words. Like everything, there was still moving, but I wasn't inside it properly anymore. I nodded slowly. That's what happens when something real interrupts something built. He looked at me. I don't know how to balance it, he said. Balance what? I asked. My life, he said quietly. The person I am there and the person I am when I'm with you. I took another bite before answering. You don't balance them, I said. He frowned slightly. Then what do I do? You integrate them, I replied. He looked confused. I continued. You stop pretending you are two different people. That statement made him go quiet again. I could see him processing it. Not rejecting it. Just trying to understand it beyond business logic. After a while, he asked something softer. Do you ever regret everything you gave up for me? I stopped eating for a moment. That question, it wasn't new. but it had never been asked with this tone before. Not accusation. Not guilt. Just fear of being the reason someone else disappeared. I looked at him carefully. Regret is a complicated word, I said. He waited. I continued. If I say yes, you will carry it like punishment. He didn't respond. If I say no, you will think I am lying, I added. His eyes lowered slightly. So what is the truth? He asked. I took a slow breath. The truth is, I said, I did what I believed love required. Silence. And I didn't know it would cost this much. That was the closest I had come to numbing it fully. Not blame. Not accusation. Just recognition of cost. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't know either, he said quietly. I nodded. I know. Another pause. Then he leaned back slightly on the bench. I keep thinking about what I should have done differently, he said. I looked forward. There are many answers to that, I replied. Tell me one, he said immediately. I turned slightly toward him. You could have seen me as part of your success instead of something outside it, I said. That made him close his eyes briefly. Not in denial. In acceptance. I didn't know I was separating it, he admitted. I know, I said again. That word was becoming a bridge between us. Not agreement. Not forgiveness. But acknowledgement of intention versus impact. A long moment passed. Then he said something quieter. I don't want to lose you again. I looked at him for a long time. And for the first time, I realized something important. This was no longer just about the past. It was about what kind of future could exist after damage that could not be undone. I'm still here, I said softly. He looked at me. But I'm not the same version you are trying to hold on to, I added. He nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand that. The wind moved gently through the trees. Not harsh today. Just present. Daniel looked at me again. What happens now? He asked. I looked at the park. At the people passing. At the world continuing. And I answered honestly. I don't know, I said. Then I added something I had not said before. But I am not disappearing. That made him breathe differently. Not relief. Not happiness. But grounding. As if something inside him finally had a stable point to stand near. He nodded. Okay, he said quietly. And for the first time since everything had broken, we sat in silence that didn't feel like distance. It felt like beginning to understand what remained when illusions were gone. The days after that did not suddenly become easier. They became structured. Not healed. Not fixed. Just structured. Daniel came every day after that morning. Sometimes early, sometimes late, but he came. And each time he sat a little longer, spoke a little more carefully, listened a little less like a businessman, and a little more like a son trying to relearn something he had once assumed was permanent. I never asked him to come, and he never asked permission to stay. It became a quiet agreement between two people who were still learning what family meant after it had been fractured. Some days he brought food. Some days he just brought silence. And strangely, both felt necessary. I began spending more time at the small park. Not because it was safe, but because it was familiar in its emptiness. Shelters had warmth, but they also had movement, constant arrivals, departures, reminders that nothing stayed still. The park, at least, allowed me to sit without being part of anyone else's urgency. One afternoon, Daniel arrived later than usual. The sky had already started dimming slightly, even though it wasn't evening yet. He looked tired. More than tired. He looked mentally occupied in a way I recognized from his younger years, when he used to overthink exams, decisions, futures. He sat beside me without speaking at first. Then he exhaled slowly. I met with my board today, he said. I nodded slightly. I didn't ask what they discussed, but he continued anyway. They asked me if I was distracted. I glanced at him. "And what did you say?" I asked. He gave a faint, almost humorless smile. I told them I was recalibrating priorities. I looked forward again. "That sounds like something you would say before," I said. He nodded. "It is." A pause. Then he added more honestly, "But I don't feel like that person in those meetings anymore." I turned slightly toward him. "What person do you feel like?" I asked. He hesitated. "That's the problem," he said. "I don't know anymore." The admission wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, but it carried weight. I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit, because I had spent years being one version of myself for survival and another version for motherhood, until both started blending into exhaustion. "You're between identities," I said softly. He looked at me. "Is that what this is?" I nodded. "Yes." Another silence followed. Then he spoke again. I told them I might take a break from some responsibilities. That surprised me slightly. Not because he couldn't, but because he was finally considering it. "Why?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "Because I realized I can't keep building things while ignoring what built me." I stayed quiet for a moment. That sentence was different from earlier ones. Less defensive. More reflective. I nodded slowly. "That's not easy," I said. "I know," he replied immediately. A breeze moved through the park again, lifting small pieces of dust and leaves. I adjusted my shawl slightly. Daniel noticed. He always noticed now. He took off his jacket without hesitation and placed it gently over my shoulders. This time, I didn't refuse. Not because I needed it, but because I was learning something too. Accepting care is also a form of trust. "I met someone from your old neighborhood records," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "A woman who used to work with you at the diner in your early years here." I didn't respond immediately, because that part of my life felt distant now, almost like it belonged to someone I once knew. "She remembered you," he continued. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "What did she say?" He smiled faintly. "That you never complained." I looked away. That sounded like something people say when they don't know the full story. "I didn't have time to complain," I said quietly. He nodded. "I think that's what she meant," he said. Another pause. Then he added something softer. "She also said you used to talk about me all the time." That made me still. I didn't answer immediately, because I didn't know how to explain that kind of truth without reopening something delicate. "Yes," I said finally. "I did." He looked at me. "What did you say about me?" I considered the question carefully. "Mostly hopes," I said. He frowned slightly. "Hopes?" I nodded. "That you would not have to live the same life I did." Silence. "And now?" he asked quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. "Now I think you lived a different life," I said, "but not without cost." He exhaled slowly. "I keep thinking about the launch day," he said suddenly. My expression didn't change, but I listened. "I keep replaying the moment I asked you to leave." His voice tightened slightly. "And I can't understand how I let myself do that." I turned slightly toward him. "You understand it now," I said. He nodded. "Yes. But understanding and undoing are not the same thing," I added. He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." A long silence followed. Then he asked something that felt more vulnerable than anything before. "Do you think I can ever be forgiven for that?" I didn't answer immediately. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because forgiveness is not a simple yes or no. It is something that grows slowly, if it grows at all. I think forgiveness is not something you ask for directly, I said. He looked at me. Then what is it? He asked. It's something that happens when actions stop repeating harm, I said. He absorbed that quietly. For a while, neither of us spoke. The sky darkened a little more. Streetlights began to flicker on in the distance. People moved through the park in pairs, in groups, in directions that made sense to them. We stayed still. Then Daniel spoke again. I don't want to lose you again, he said softly. I looked at him. This time, I didn't respond immediately. Because I realized something important. He wasn't asking for possession. He was asking for continuity. I'm not going anywhere, I said finally. A pause. But I am also not going back to what I was before, I added. He nodded. I understand that now, he said. And for the first time, he didn't look like he was trying to fix anything. He just accepted it. We sat there as night slowly arrived. And for the first time since everything had broken, the silence between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like learning how to exist without erasing each other. The night after that conversation stayed with me longer than the day itself. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because for the first time in a long time, I slept without feeling like I was disappearing while awake. It was not comfort. It was exhaustion finally doing its job. Morning arrived with a pale light that barely touched the shelter windows. I didn't rush to leave. There was no urgency anymore in the same way there used to be. Survival had once meant constant motion. Now it meant understanding when to stay still. I folded the thin blanket and stepped outside. The city was already active, cars moving, people walking, coffee cups in hands, lives already fully formed for the day. I walked toward the park again. It had become a place I returned to without deciding. As if my body understood something my thoughts were still negotiating. Daniel was already there, sitting on the same bench, waiting. That fact no longer surprised me, but it still carried weight. He stood when he saw me, then sat again when I reached him, as if matching my pace mattered more than his own movement. He looked different today. Not physically, but internally. There was a kind of steadiness in him that hadn't been there before. Not certainty, but restraint. I canceled a meeting today, he said. I raised my eyes slightly. That seems to be happening often now, I replied. A faint smile passed over his face. Yes. A pause. This one I canceled intentionally. I nodded. Difference, I asked. He looked at the ground for a moment. Before I was reacting, he said. Now I'm choosing. That was progress. Not perfect, but noticeable. He reached into a small bag beside him and pulled out a thermos. I brought coffee, he said. I glanced at it. Then at him. You're learning habits, I said. He gave a small shrug. I'm trying. I accepted it this time. Not because I needed caffeine, but because accepting small gestures had become part of rebuilding something neither of us had named yet. We sat quietly for a while. The park was more alive today than before. A few children passed by with a caregiver. A jogger moved through quickly. Life always finds a rhythm, even around broken things. Daniel broke the silence first. I spoke to someone yesterday about housing options for you. I turned slightly. I told you I don't need. He interrupted gently. I know, he said quickly, then softened. I didn't mean it like before. I paused, then nodded slightly for him to continue. I didn't arrange anything. He said, I just asked questions about what you would want if you ever decided you wanted stability again. That phrasing mattered. If you ever decided. Not I will fix this. Not I will move you. Choice. I studied him for a moment. That's different, I said. He nodded. I'm trying to be careful about what I assume now. I looked forward again. That's good, I said quietly. Another pause. Then he spoke again, more hesitant this time. I've been thinking about something you said. I didn't respond immediately. I let him continue. You said I separated my life into versions, he said. I nodded. Yes. I didn't understand it fully at first, he admitted, but now I think I do. I turned slightly toward him. And, I asked. He exhaled slowly. I think I built a version of myself that only worked because I removed certain truths from it. I stayed quiet. And you were one of those truths, he added. That sentence was heavier than it should have been, because it placed responsibility where it belonged, not as guilt alone, but as recognition. I nodded slowly. I was part of your foundation, I said. He looked at me. And I treated you like something outside it, he admitted. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just real. Then I said something I had been forming in my mind for a while. You're not the first person to do that, I said. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I looked forward. People often forget what built them when they start being seen for what they built. He listened carefully. It happens in different ways, I continued. Sometimes with family, sometimes with identity, sometimes with history. I paused. But it always costs something. He nodded slowly. I don't want it to cost you any more, he said. I turned toward him fully. That part is already done, I replied softly. He looked down. I know. A longer silence settled between us. Then, unexpectedly, he asked something different. Do you remember when I was learning to ride a bike? I blinked slightly. The memory surfaced quickly. Yes, I said. You used to run behind me, he continued, a faint smile appearing, even when I kept falling. I nodded. I remember. I used to think you were just making sure I didn't get hurt, he said. And now, I asked. He looked at me. Now I think you were making sure I believed I could stand up again after falling. That made me quiet, because he was partly right. Not in intention, but in outcome. I didn't want you to fear falling, I said. He nodded. I know. Another pause. Then he said something more personal. I think I stopped believing I could fall at all, he said, and that's why I didn't know how to deal with it when I did. I listened carefully. That's a dangerous belief, I said gently. I understand that now, he replied. We sat in silence again. But this time, it felt less like distance, and more like alignment. Eventually, he looked at me. I want to do something, he said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. What kind of something? He hesitated. Not charity, he said quickly. Not compensation, not trying to erase anything. I waited. I want to create something, he continued, that supports women like you, women who raised families alone, who were invisible in the systems that should have helped them. I looked at him for a long moment. That sounds like business thinking, I said softly. He gave a faint smile. It started that way, he admitted, but it doesn't feel like business anymore. I considered his words carefully. Not as approval, not as rejection, but as observation. That could become meaningful, I said finally. He nodded. But I don't want to do it without understanding, he added quickly. Not just statistics, not just reports. I want to understand the human part. I looked at him. And how do you plan to do that? I asked. He hesitated. By listening, he said. Then he added, softer. If you're willing, I want you to help me understand it. That request hung between us. Not heavy, but significant. I didn't answer immediately. Because it wasn't a small question. It wasn't about information. It was about revisiting pain with intention. Finally, I spoke. "I will think about it," I said. He nodded immediately. "That's enough," he said. And for the first time, I believed he meant it when he said something didn't require urgency. We sat there a little longer. The coffee cooled between us. The city continued its endless movement. And something between us, still unspoken, still unfinished, began to shift into something that was no longer only about loss, but also about what might still be built from it. The days after his proposal to build something did not turn into sudden action. They turned into questions. Questions that arrived quietly, without urgency, but refused to leave. Daniel kept coming to the park, and slowly his visits began to change shape. He stopped bringing only coffee or food. Sometimes he brought printed pages, reports, articles, notes written in a hurried, careful handwriting that didn't belong to the polished businessman he showed the world. And each time, he would sit beside me and ask things he had never asked before. Not about success, not about growth, but about survival. "Where did you sleep the worst?" he asked one morning. "What did people ignore the most when you were working?" he asked another day. "What does help actually look like, from your side?" At first, I answered slowly, carefully. Because answering truthfully meant reopening rooms I had locked tightly, just to keep moving forward. But over time, something changed. My answers stopped feeling like pain alone. They started feeling like memory that had finally found a place to be spoken. One afternoon, the air was warmer than usual. Not warm enough to call it spring, but enough that the city felt less hostile. Daniel arrived carrying a folder thicker than before. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he stood in front of me for a moment. "I met someone today," he said. I looked up slightly. "Who?" I asked. "A woman at a community center," he replied. I waited. "She reminded me of you," he said. That made me still. Not because of comparison, but because of recognition. He continued. "She's been working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids alone. No support system, no proper insurance. She was explaining it like it was normal." I nodded slowly. "It is normal for many people," I said. He frowned slightly. "That's what I don't understand," he said. "How does something so heavy become normal?" I looked at him. "By repeating it long enough," I said. Silence followed. Then he finally sat down. But this time, he didn't open his folder immediately. He just held it, like it weighed more than paper should. "I told her I was thinking of starting something," he said. "And?" I asked. He gave a faint smile. She laughed. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Why?" "She said people like me usually only show up after they've already succeeded," he said, "and then try to fix what they never lived." I didn't respond immediately. Because that statement wasn't cruel. It was accurate. Daniel looked down. "I didn't know how to answer her," he admitted. I nodded slowly. "You didn't need to answer her," I said. He looked up. "Then what should I have done?" "Listened," I said simply. He exhaled slowly. "I did," he said, "and it made me realize something worse." I waited. "I don't understand the world you lived in," he said. I looked at him carefully. "That's not worse," I said gently. He frowned. "It feels like it," he said. I shook my head slightly. "No," I replied. "It's only worse if you pretend you already do." That made him quiet. A longer silence followed. Then he finally opened the folder. Inside were structured notes. Plans. Diagrams. Early ideas. "I want to build a support network," he said, "for single mothers, widows, people working multiple jobs, financial education, housing assistance, healthcare access." He paused, then added, "But I don't want it to be disconnected from reality." I nodded. "That part matters," I said. He looked at me. That's why I need you, he said. I didn't react immediately, because I understood what he was asking now. Not advice, not approval, but grounding. A reality he could not simulate through data alone. I studied him for a moment. You want me to tell you what you cannot see, I said. He nodded. Yes. I looked forward again. That's not simple work, I said. I know, he replied immediately. A pause. And it's not comfortable, I added. I know that too, he said. Another silence. The wind moved gently through the trees. People passed behind us, unaware of what was being decided in quiet sentences. Finally, I spoke. I will tell you what I remember, I said. He straightened slightly. But I will not turn my life into a lesson without purpose. He nodded quickly. I understand. And I will stop when I need to stop, I added. Yes, he said again. I looked at him. And you will not turn my pain into a presentation, I said softly. His face tightened slightly. Then he nodded. I promise. A long pause followed. Then I said, then I will help you. Something shifted in his expression. Not excitement. Not relief. But something closer to grounding. As if he had been floating and finally touched something solid. Thank you, he said quietly. I shook my head slightly. Don't thank me yet, I replied. He gave a small, tired smile. I won't. We sat for a while without speaking. Then, unexpectedly, he closed the folder. I don't want this to be only about what you suffered, he said. I looked at him. What do you mean? I asked. I want it to also be about what you carried, he said. What you protected, what you built without recognition. That made me quiet. Because that was a different framing. Not victimhood. Not tragedy. But endurance. I looked down at my hands. I don't know if people care about that part, I said. Daniel shook his head immediately. They should, he said. Another silence. Then he added something softer. I do. I looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible in my own story. Not healed. Not redeemed. But acknowledged. As evening began to approach, Daniel stood slowly. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. I nodded. He hesitated, then asked. Same time. I looked at the park. At the fading light. Yes, I said. And he left. I stayed. Not because I was waiting anymore, but because I had started participating in something that was no longer just about survival. It was becoming something closer to being seen in full, without being reduced to it. The next morning, the park felt different. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because I had. There is a strange shift that happens when your pain is no longer only personal, but spoken into something larger. It doesn't disappear. It just stops being trapped inside you. I arrived earlier than usual. The bench was still cold from the night air. I sat down and pulled Daniel's jacket closer around my shoulders. I had stopped returning it without thinking. Not because I needed it every time, but because refusing care had started to feel like refusing connection. He came later than expected. When he arrived, he wasn't alone. A woman walked a few steps behind him, holding a small notebook. She looked cautious, observant, like someone who had learned to read environments before entering them. Daniel slowed as he reached me. I hope this is okay, he said quietly. I looked at him, then at her. Who is she? I asked. This is Maya, he said. She works with a nonprofit focused on housing support. The woman gave a polite nod. Hello, she said gently. I nodded back. Daniel gestured toward the bench. Can we sit? He asked. I motioned slightly. They both sat. But I noticed something immediately. This was no longer just our conversation. It had expanded, not in size, but in consequence. Daniel opened his folder again, but this time he didn't start speaking immediately. He looked at Maya first. She asked to understand real cases, he said. Maya nodded. I want to learn from lived experience, she said, not just reports. I studied her carefully. People like her existed in systems I had brushed against, but never been part of. Systems that promised help, but often required you to already know how to ask for it correctly. Daniel turned slightly toward me. I told her about you, he said. That made me pause. Not because I was surprised, but because I was suddenly aware of being interpreted again. I didn't use your name without asking, he added quickly. I nodded slowly. Thank you, I said. Maya looked at me with a calm expression. I won't ask anything you don't want to answer, she said. I appreciated that immediately. Because so many systems begin by taking without consent. Daniel leaned forward slightly. We're trying to design something more grounded, he said. Not just funding programs, but actually understanding how people fall into these situations and what keeps them there. I listened, but I also noticed something else. He was no longer speaking like a man trying to fix a personal mistake. He was speaking like someone trying to build structure around it. That was progress, but it was also distance. Not emotional distance. Structural distance. I spoke slowly. Most people do fall into it, I said. Both of them looked at me. I continued. They move into it slowly, one decision at a time. Rent, work, illness, loss. Then it becomes normal before it becomes visible. Maya wrote something down. Daniel stayed still. That's important, he said quietly. I nodded. But what matters more, I added, is that once you're inside it, getting out is not just about opportunity. It's about energy. He frowned slightly. Energy, he repeated. I looked at him. Yes. When you are surviving, every day takes something from you, I said. Not just money, not just time, decision-making, health, dignity. I paused. And people outside that reality think you can just apply your way out of it. Maya stopped writing for a moment. Daniel looked down. I continued. But application requires space, and many people don't have space left inside them. Silence followed. It wasn't heavy. It was focused. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's something data doesn't show, he said. I nodded. No, I replied. Data shows outcomes, not exhaustion. Maya looked at me. That distinction is important, she said softly. I met her gaze. Yes, I said. Daniel closed his folder slightly. I don't want this project to become something that looks good but doesn't reach people like you, he said. I looked at him carefully. You have to decide something early, I said. He straightened slightly. What? Whether you are building assistance, I said, or building understanding first. He frowned. What's the difference? I took a slow breath. Assistance tries to solve immediately, I said. Understanding stays long enough to not make mistakes. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I think I've been rushing toward solving, he admitted. I nodded. That's natural, I said. That's what success trains you to do. A faint, tired smile crossed his face. Yes, he said. Maya spoke gently. We've seen programs fail because they were designed without that understanding, she said. They assume stability exists before help arrives. I looked at her. And it often doesn't, I said. She nodded. Exactly. A pause followed. Then Daniel looked at me again. I want you to be involved in this properly, he said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. What does properly mean? I asked. He hesitated. Not just stories, he said. Not just interviews. I want you to help shape what this becomes. I stayed quiet. because that request carried weight. Not emotional weight, but responsibility. I looked down at my hands, then back at him. I can help you understand, I said carefully, but I am not becoming a symbol for it. He nodded immediately. I don't want that, he said. I studied him. Then be careful how you use what I tell you, I added. He met my eyes. I will, he said. And I believed he meant it. At least in that moment. The wind shifted slightly through the park. People moved around us again. Life continued outside the small circle of conversation that had begun to form into something more structured. Maya closed her notebook. This is valuable, she said softly. I nodded once. Then listen carefully, I replied. Daniel looked between us. And for the first time, I saw something new in him. Not success. Not guilt. But responsibility beginning to take shape in a different form. Not as ownership, but as awareness. After a while, Maya stood. I'll compile this and come back with a framework draft, she said. Daniel stood as well. I'll walk you out, he said. She nodded and stepped away with him. Before leaving, Daniel turned back briefly. I'll come back after this, he said. I nodded. Okay, I replied. Then they walked away. And I stayed alone on the bench again. But this time, solitude did not feel like abandonment. It felt like pause. And in that pause, I realized something important. My story was no longer only about what had happened to me. It had begun to become part of something that was still forming. The following weeks began to blur into a new kind of routine. Not the routine of survival I once knew, where every day meant finding food, work, shelter. This was something different. A routine of being asked. Being listened to. Being included in decisions I never imagined I would be part of again. Daniel came regularly, but now the meetings were no longer only in the park. Sometimes we met in small community spaces Maya arranged. Sometimes in quiet offices that didn't feel like his company world, but something softer, more neutral. Places where power was not immediately visible. Maya had started calling it listening sessions, though I never fully accepted the term. Because what I was doing wasn't speaking into a system. It was remembering out loud. One afternoon, the three of us sat in a small room with plain walls and a round table. No glass, no branding, no distraction. Daniel placed a printed draft in front of me. We've built a first structure, he said. I didn't touch it immediately. I had learned to be careful with documents like that. They often turned lives into categories. Maya watched me quietly. You can take your time, she said. I nodded slightly, then finally picked it up. I read slowly. Sections about housing assistance, emergency support, job transition programs, mental health access. Each part was carefully written, structured, thoughtful. But I noticed something immediately. It still spoke about people. Not with them. I placed the paper down. They both waited. I spoke carefully. This is good, I said. Daniel straightened slightly. But, I added. He exhaled. I knew there was a but, he said softly. I looked at him. It's still written from the outside, I said. Maya leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? She asked. I tapped the paper gently. It describes needs, I said, but it doesn't yet describe life inside those needs. Daniel frowned. Like what? He asked. I thought for a moment, then answered honestly. It doesn't show what it feels like to choose between food and electricity, I said, or what it does to your mind when every decision has consequences you can't undo. Silence. Maya nodded slowly. That's a missing layer, she said. Daniel looked down at the draft. I thought we were getting closer, he said quietly. You are, I replied. A pause. But closeness and understanding are not the same thing yet. He leaned back slightly. I don't know how to capture that layer, he admitted. I studied him. You don't capture it, I said. He looked at me. You experience it through listening long enough that it changes how you write, I continued. Maya wrote something down again. Daniel stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. I think I've been trying to structure something I haven't fully felt, he said. I nodded. That's correct. He gave a faint, tired smile. It's uncomfortable hearing you say that so directly. I responded gently. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. A silence followed. Not tense, just honest. Then Maya spoke softly. This is actually important progress, she said. Most initiatives never reach this stage of self-correction. Daniel looked at her. I don't want this to become another well-intentioned system that still misses people, he said. I watched him carefully. There was sincerity in his voice now that didn't sound performative. It sounded committed. After a moment, he turned to me. What would you change first? He asked. That question mattered, because it was no longer about ideas. It was about direction. I thought carefully, then answered. Stop assuming stability as the starting point, I said. He nodded immediately. Okay. And stop designing help like people have time to wait for it to arrive in perfect form, I added. Maya looked at me. That's critical, she said. Daniel exhaled slowly. We've been thinking in systems, he said, not urgency. I nodded. Yes. A pause. Then I added something more personal. And don't forget that dignity is part of survival. That made both of them quiet. Daniel looked down. I think I ignored that completely before, he said. I didn't respond immediately. Because honesty had become something we were all learning how to hold without breaking. After a moment, he spoke again. I want you to tell me more about your life then, he said quietly. I looked at him, not surprised, but aware. Because this was the part where storytelling becomes dangerous if not handled carefully. What do you want to know? I asked. He hesitated. Not details for the project, he said quickly. Just you. I studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Okay, I said. Maya didn't interrupt. She just listened. And I began. I told them about the nights when I worked double shifts and still came home to a child who needed warmth more than explanation. About the days when illness meant choosing between medicine and rent. About the silence of buses at 5 a.m., when the city feels like it belongs to people who are already asleep in better places. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't soften it. I just spoke. And as I did, I noticed something in Daniel's face. Not shock. Not guilt. But absorption. Like he was finally seeing something he had walked past his entire life, without realizing it had been there for him too. When I finished, there was a long silence. Maya broke it first. Thank you, she said quietly. Daniel didn't speak immediately. When he finally did, his voice was low. I didn't know it was that continuous, he said. I looked at him. It is continuous for many people, I replied. He nodded slowly, then added something softer. I don't want to just build something now, he said. I want to change how I see everything I built before. I watched him carefully. That was no longer about the project. That was internal. I think that's the real work, I said. He nodded again. Yes. As the meeting ended, Maya gathered her things. I'll revise the draft based on this, she said. Daniel stood with her. I'll review it again, he said. They both turned toward the door. Before leaving, Daniel paused. He looked at me for a moment, longer than usual. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. I nodded. Okay. Then they left. and I remained in the quiet room alone. For a long time, I didn't move. Not because I was tired, but because something inside me was shifting in a way I couldn't immediately name. I had spent years being invisible, then weeks being heard, and now I was beginning to be understood in fragments. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough that the silence no longer felt like erasure. It felt like something that was still being written. The morning of the 12th day arrived with a strange calm. Not peace, not resolution, but a calm that comes when something heavy is no longer resisting change, even if it hasn't yet transformed into something lighter. I reached the community space before Daniel and Maya. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was arriving to be interviewed, or analyzed, or remembered. I simply arrived. That alone felt different. The room was already set up, same round table, same plain walls, same quiet atmosphere that had slowly become familiar over the past weeks. Familiarity, I had learned, does not always mean comfort. Sometimes it just means you know how the discomfort behaves. I sat down and waited. Daniel arrived first. He paused at the door when he saw me already there, then smiled faintly. "You're early," he said. I nodded. "So are you," I replied. He looked around the room. "I couldn't sleep properly," he admitted as he sat down. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Again?" I asked. He gave a small, tired exhale. "It's becoming normal," he said. I watched him carefully. "No," I said softly, "it's becoming awareness." He looked at me, then nodded slowly. Maya arrived a few minutes later, carrying a thinner folder than before. That detail mattered. Less paper did not mean less work. It meant refinement. She placed it on the table. "We've revised the entire structure," she said, "based on everything shared." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "And?" he asked. Maya glanced at me briefly. "I think we're closer now," she said. I didn't touch the folder immediately. I had learned that what matters is not how something looks revised, but what has been removed, what has been added, and what has finally been acknowledged. I opened it. This time, I read differently. Not as someone being represented, but as someone checking whether truth had survived translation. The language had changed. Less distant. More grounded. It spoke not only about support systems, but about instability itself. About cycles instead of isolated crises. About exhaustion as a condition, not a temporary state. I closed the folder slowly. Both of them waited. I spoke carefully. "This is better," I said. Daniel let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "But," he asked quietly. I looked at him. There was no need to soften it now. "No, but," I said. A pause. Then I added, "But now the harder part begins." Maya nodded immediately. "Implementation," she said. I shook my head slightly. "Not implementation," I corrected. They both looked at me. "Reality," I said. Daniel frowned slightly. "What's the difference?" he asked. I leaned forward a little. "Implementation assumes control," I said. "Reality does not behave on schedule." Silence followed. Maya wrote something down slowly. Daniel stayed quiet. Then he spoke. "I've been thinking about something," he said. I waited. "I used to believe success was about building something that works," he said. "Now I think it's about building something that continues to work even when you're not controlling it." I looked at him carefully. "That's closer," I said. He gave a faint nod. "And I've also been thinking about us," he added. That word, us, hung in the air differently now. Not ownership. Not dependency. Something in between. I didn't interrupt. He continued. "I don't want this project to replace what I should have done as your son," he said. I stayed quiet. I can't undo that, he added. No, I said gently. He looked down. But I can make sure I don't continue being that version of myself, he said. I nodded slowly. Yes. A pause. Then he looked at me again. I want to ask you something, he said. I gestured slightly for him to continue. He hesitated, then spoke. What am I to you now? The question wasn't simple. It wasn't emotional. It was identity. I took my time before answering, because anything rushed would be inaccurate. I looked at him. You are my son, I said. His expression shifted slightly. Not relief. Not surprise. But something deeper. Then I added. But not the same son I once had in my mind when I was surviving. He nodded slowly. That makes sense, he said quietly. Maya observed without interrupting. I continued. And I am not the same mother you remember from your success stories, I said. He gave a faint, almost sad smile. I'm starting to understand that, he said. A silence settled again. Not heavy now. Just real. Then Maya spoke softly. We're at a point where this can move from design into pilot phase, she said. Daniel nodded. Yes. He turned toward me. But only if you're still willing to stay involved, he said. I looked at him for a long moment. Not because I doubted him, but because I needed to understand myself in this new structure. I had been invisible, then visible, then heard. And now I was being asked to remain present in something that would continue without me if I left. That mattered. Finally, I spoke. I will stay involved, I said. A pause. But I will not carry it for you, I added. Daniel nodded immediately. I don't want you to, he said. Maya closed her folder. This is a strong foundation, she said. And for the first time, I believed her. After the meeting ended, Maya left first. Daniel stayed behind. He didn't rush. Didn't speak immediately. Just sat. Finally, he looked at me. I keep thinking about that day at the office, he said quietly. I didn't react. I don't think I'll ever fully forget it, he added. I nodded slowly. That's okay, I said. He looked at me. It still hurts, he admitted. I met his gaze. I know, I said. A pause. Then I added something I hadn't said before. It should hurt, I said gently. He exhaled slowly. I don't want it to define everything, he said. I nodded. Then don't let it, I replied. Silence again. Then he stood slowly. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. I nodded. Okay, I replied. He hesitated at the door. Then looked back once more. Not as a businessman. Not as someone trying to fix something. But as a son, standing in front of something he could no longer unsee. And then he left. I stayed in the room alone. But this time, aloneness did not feel like absence. It felt like completion of a cycle that was no longer closed. Outside, life continued moving. And inside me, something quieter settled. Not forgiveness. Not forgetting. But understanding that even broken stories can still continue forward, without pretending they were never broken at all.